Because you do the most, you don't need to be treated fairly. My mother, Margot Carter, said it very softly, as if it were an unwritten rule in this family. And Wyatt, my younger brother, who rarely showed up at the shop, was given all the decision-making power. It turned out that here, doing more was not a contribution. Doing more was an excuse for them to assume you would always endure, while the benefits went to the one who knew how to say the right things. And that was when I knew if I didn't leave, I would disappear completely. Before I continue this story, I want to ask you something very simple. Right now, where are you listening to me? In the car on your way home? In the kitchen? While dinner is slowly getting cold? Or alone after a long day when no one asked how you were doing? If that line just now hit somewhere familiar, leave a comment. Press like, subscribe, and stay until the end of the video, because what happens next, not everyone is calm enough to hear all the way through. Carter Laundromat sits right on the corner of Main and Elm in a small town in western Pennsylvania. For more than 20 years, this place fed my entire family. Rows of gray industrial washers, tile floors always damp with the smell of detergent, the steady vibration that never stopped. That was the sound of our lives. And it was also the sound I heard most clearly every morning, starting at 4:30. I was the one who opened the doors first. Always me. I changed filters, checked the pipes, handled the machines that acted up right in the middle of the busiest hours. When customers complained about missing clothes, I was the one who apologized. When a contract for laundering linens for a nursing home needed to be signed urgently, I stayed until evening. For 10 years, I knew every strange noise a machine could make, every familiar customer's face, every peak hour. But on the business cards, I had no title. Wyatt was different. He showed up when local reporters came by to take photos, when someone needed a family representative at community meetings. Crisp shirts, the right smile. People called Wyatt the young owner and me the girl behind the counter. I was used to hearing it. That afternoon, my father, Henry Carter, gathered the whole family right in the middle of the shop. He talked about the future, about expansion, about branding. Then he turned to Wyatt and said it was time to hand over management to him. He has vision, and his image fits better. My mother nodded. No one looked at me. I hadn't even had the chance to say anything when the error alarm went off. Machine number 6, the oldest machine in the shop. My mother turned to me, her familiar tone. "Sloan, go check it for me. Customers are waiting." I walked over like I always did, but this time, as I bent down to open the machine panel, I clearly heard the conversation behind me. They started discussing new decisions I would be expected to carry out. All the responsibility, not a trace of authority. I stood there, hands smeared with machine oil, listening to the steady spin of the washer like a heartbeat. And in that exact moment, a thought passed through my mind, fast and unmistakable. A line was being drawn, and I was being pushed to the side that no longer had a name. The washers vibrated beneath the floor like a heart that was never allowed to miss a beat. The smell of oil mixed with detergent clung to my skin, my hair, the clothes I wore all day. I stood behind the row of industrial machines, bending down to check a worn connector, my hand touching cold, rough metal. The skin around my knuckles had been cracked for a long time. Every twist of a bolt burned. I was used to it. My body moved automatically, doing what needed to be done, even when my mind was somewhere else. Customers came and went, nonstop. They nodded hello, asked which machine was free, asked me to break bills into change. Some called out, "Miss," so naturally, as if I had always been here and always would be. They recognized my face, but no one asked my name. There was no need. In this shop, I was like the wall clock, always running on time but never looked at for long. Around midday, Wyatt walked in. The ceiling lights reflected off his brand new watch. White shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable. An elderly couple stepped up, shook his hand, smiling brightly. "You must be the young owner? The place has been running so smoothly lately." I stood a few steps away, still holding a washer door open to let some heat escape. Wyatt nodded, exchanged a few polite lines. They thanked him and walked off. No one looked my way. As afternoon faded and customers thinned out, I wiped down the counter and organized invoices. Inside the drawer, an old college class list was tucked between yellowed receipts. For a split second, a lecture hall appeared in my mind, then vanished. Back then, I had told my advisor I was taking one semester off, just one, to help my family when my father was hospitalized, when the shop was short-staffed. One semester turned into two, then into years. Life has a way of stretching temporary things without asking permission. A dry clatter came from the far row of machines. I hurried over. A young customer stood there, flustered, the machine flashing an error. I crouched down, adjusted the sensor, restarted it. The machine ran. She let out a breath and smiled in thanks. "This place is really good," she said. "It always runs so well." I nodded and walked away, a familiar feeling spreading in my chest, not quite exhaustion, not quite emptiness. At the end of the day, I was the last one to stay. I turned off the lights, checked the locks, recorded water and electricity usage. The numbers were steady, precise. Everything was still running, the way it had for years. I stood in the middle of the shop, listening to the silence now that the machines were off. The space felt larger than usual. A thought passed through, not dramatic or loud, just a question set down gently, like placing a coin on a table. If tomorrow I didn't open the doors at 4:30, if these hands didn't tighten the familiar bolts, if the wall clock no longer had someone paying attention to it, then what would happen? The meeting took place on a Thursday night while I was in the back machine room. I knew there was a meeting because the office lights stayed on later than usual, because my father's voice dropped lower, more guarded. No one called me in. The door closed, leaving only the slow spin of the dryers and the damp fabric smell clinging to my sleeves. A while later, my mother came out and placed a stack of printed pages on the counter. "Tomorrow, add a maintenance checklist," she said in her familiar tone. "Include chemical tracking and the weekend night shifts." I flipped through it quickly, bullet points stretching on. More work, not a single line about authority. I nodded out of habit. She looked at me for a second, then added, "You're used to hardship." I went back to the machine room. The wall clock ticked softly, the second hand moving notch by notch. Whenever I worked overtime, I used to look up at it to track the hours, to know how long until I could turn off the lights. Tonight, the minute hand felt slower than usual. I wiped my hands on a rag, adjusted a belt, listened as the machine returned to its steady rhythm. Running properly was enough. At least that was what I had always believed. Near 10 p.m., I heard laughter from the office. The door was slightly open. My father said something, his voice low but clear. "She can't go anywhere." The sentence fell into the air like a pebble dropped onto concrete. I stood still, my hand resting on a still warm machine lid. No one said my name, they didn't need to. I understood exactly where I stood in that story. The last customer left. I pulled down the metal shutter, locked it, recorded the numbers like every other day. Neat, aligned figures. Everything was still running, just as they always said. I looked up at the clock one more time. The hour hand pointed to 11. Inside the office, the lights were off. The meeting had ended, without me. On the way home, cold wind swept across the parking lot. I opened the trunk and placed my toolbox back in its spot. The movements were so familiar they required no thought. Only a strange hollow space remained in my chest. Not painful, not loud. Like when you miss a step on the stairs but keep your balance, your heart jumping for just a brief beat. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee cooling. The phone was silent. The wall clock at home ticked steadily, just like the one at the shop. I looked at it longer than usual. For the first time in many years, something that had once felt unquestionable began to crack. Not with a loud break, but with a silence stretched past what could be endured. The next morning, I arrived at the shop earlier than usual. It was still dark, the glass reflecting faint streetlight. I unlocked the door, switched on the ceiling lights, heard electricity run through the system like a long breath. There was no one else. There didn't need to be. I started in the back machine room. Opening a notebook, I wrote down every operating step that had lived only in my head until now. Weekly maintenance schedules, signs a dryer was overloaded, the order of steps when a water line clogged. I wrote each detail clearly, neatly, without commentary. My hand moved fast and steady as if it had been rehearsed for a long time. Each page set down meant one task completed. I didn't stop. Near noon, I printed the entire document and bound it into a thin packet. I placed it on the office desk right next to the old landline phone. No note, no message, everything that was needed was there. The email was sent at 12:17 p.m. Just one short line, no elaboration or explanation. I was resigning from my position at the shop effective today. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before closing it. In the afternoon, my father arrived. Henry Carter stood in the office doorway looking at the packet on the desk. He didn't speak right away. I set the keyring down. Metal touched wood with a soft, decisive sound. "Everything you need to know is in there," I said, my voice as ordinary as if I were handing over a shift. He picked up the keys, his hand slowing for just a beat. We didn't look at each other for long. We didn't need to. I walked past the machines one last time. I placed my hand on machine number 6, the one that always malfunctioned. The metal was cool. I pulled down the shutter and locked it. The sound echoed through the empty space, sharper than usual. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of incoming rain. When I got home, I opened my computer and logged into the scheduling system that had followed me for 6 years. Colored blocks filled the days, morning shifts, night shifts, weekends. I stared at them for a moment. Then, one by one, the blocks disappeared, cleanly, without alerts. The screen felt strangely bare. When I closed the laptop, the room was quiet. No washers, no air alarms, just my own breathing, slow and even. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The door closed behind me. The schedule was gone. And for the first time in many years, I didn't know where I would be tomorrow morning. The first 3 days passed quietly. Then on the 4th day, my phone buzzed while I was at the grocery store. A short message from an unknown number. "Dryer number 3 isn't heating. Is there a way to reset it?" I glanced at the screen, set the phone face down next to the cart, and continued choosing apples. That evening, a second message came, then a missed call. At Carter Laundromat, things began to fall out of rhythm. Washers grew louder than usual, then shut off mid-cycle. Water flooded the floor because a valve wasn't adjusted in time. Small issues I used to fix in minutes now dragged on for hours. I wasn't there to hear the abnormal screech, to notice the faint burning smell that warned a belt was about to snap. A week later, the first reviews appeared on Google. Saw 1 star, 2 stars. Waiting an hour, and the machine still errors. No one knows how to fix anything. The place is declining. I skimmed them while drinking my morning coffee. The feeling wasn't satisfaction. It was like watching a familiar house leak in the rain after you've already moved out. Wyatt tried to manage. He signed a new industrial laundry contract with a large restaurant without carefully reading the turnaround clauses. Hundreds of tablecloths piled up. The machines couldn't handle the load. Night shifts stretched longer. Penalty invoices arrived within the week. Then a nursing home announced it was switching partners due to quality concerns. In just 10 days, 2 major clients were gone. The numbers were spoken softly at the family dinner table, heavy enough to silence everyone. The call came on a rainy afternoon. Wyatt's name appeared. I let it ring a few beats before answering. His voice was hoarse, rushed. "You know how machine number 6 always breaks down? It stopped again. Customers are waiting. Can you come help for a bit?" I stood under an awning, listening to rain hit the steps. An old image flashed quickly, me bent over in the overheated machine room, hands greasy, apologizing to customers for decisions that weren't mine. "You have the manual," I said. "Everything is in there." The line went quiet. I could hear machines in the background mixed with voices. "You're not coming back?" Wyatt asked, his voice dropping. I looked at the road ahead, rainwater running into shallow channels. "Not today," I replied, and ended the call. The messages that followed came faster. My father called. My mother left a voicemail, her voice tense, talking about pressure, about customers, about how the whole family really needed me. I listened through it once, without replaying it. Then I turned off notifications. That evening, I sat in the small room I had rented temporarily, the rain finally easing. There was no background hum of washing machines, just an unfamiliar quiet. I didn't go back to the shop. Not to prove anything. I left in silence, and that silence began to strike them in the face through compensation invoices and broken machines. The new laundry chain was less than a 15-minute drive from the old shop, but it felt like a different city. On my first day, I arrived early, out of habit. Clean glass doors, even white lighting, a lighter detergent scent. The regional manager handed me a hard plastic name badge, the print clear. Sloan Carter, shift supervisor. I clipped it to my shirt, the pin touching fabric with a very small sound. A trivial detail, but I paused for an extra beat before stepping inside. The morning shift passed quickly. I assigned stations, checked machines, resolved a minor issue in the drying area. When a young employee reported an unusual vibration, I crouched down, listened, adjusted the support angle. The machine ran smoothly. He looked at me, waiting. I nodded. "All good." He thanked me and walked off. No applause, just work done properly. At noon, the manager asked me about the maintenance schedule for the coming week. I stated clearly what needed to be done, gave appropriate timing and staffing. He wrote it down without interrupting. When I finished, he waited an extra second, as if making sure I was truly done. For the first time in 10 years, when I said, "No," the entire room stayed quiet to hear the reason instead of waving me off to keep working. Pay was delivered on time, the amount clear on the digital payslip. No negotiation, no vague promises. I used the first paycheck to buy a new pair of gloves and a simple watch. Wearing it, I watched the hands move. Time was still passing, only this time it moved with me instead of dragging me along. Mid-shift, when everything was stable, I stood in the aisle watching the machines run evenly. A brief moment passed, like when you pause mid-road to take a deep breath. I remembered evenings at the old shop, telling myself just a little more endurance would be enough, that I could carry a bit more. The thought surfaced and faded just as quickly, without needing to be chased away. At the end of the day, an elderly customer asked which setting she should use for thick blankets. I explained briefly, pointing to the instruction chart. She nodded, followed it, then came back to say, "You explained things very clearly." I smiled, a warm feeling spreading, not overwhelming, just enough to stay. When the shift ended, I unclipped my badge and put it in my bag. Outside, the late-day light cut across the pavement. I sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. No background hum of machines, no urgent calls, just a light pause, enough for me to know I was standing in a place where value didn't need permission to exist. The message came right after I got off my shift. Not from my family, but from an unknown number with a photo attached. A beige shearling coat with dark leather trim, blotched with gray streaks. A short line underneath. "Customer says it was damaged during the wash. Wants compensation." I studied the photo and recognized the expensive brand. Something that should be washed separately, on low temperature, and never put in an industrial machine. Less than an hour later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My father called first, then my mother. Their voices couldn't hold a normal rhythm anymore. Wyatt had put that load into a high-capacity dryer over the allowed limit. The heat sensor had been turned off to make it faster. One safety rule got ignored, and then it pulled a chain of other things with it. The customer was standing right in the middle of the shop, demanding an incident report. People around them pulled out their phones to record. I could picture it too clearly, like I'd stood there 100 times before. By evening, the story shifted. My mother left a long voicemail, tense, talking about family responsibility, about me leaving right when things got hard. If you were here, it wouldn't be this bad. My father was shorter, colder. You have to come back and fix this. You understand the machines best. I listened to it all, didn't replay it. Those words slid past my ears, familiar enough that I didn't need to think to understand what they meant. In my head, the steps showed up instantly. Write the report, check the heat logs, compare the procedure. All of it was in the binder I'd left behind. I opened my email and reread their industrial laundry contract. The safety clause was in bold. There was no gray area to argue. I closed the laptop. When the one carrying the responsibility disappears, the one benefiting will show their face. That sentence came through clearly, not like a conclusion, but like a cut. I stood in the kitchen, my hand on the cool countertop. Fear spread from my fingertips, but it didn't last. It gave way to something else, steadier. Not anger, order. Wyatt called last, his voice broke, choppy. Just help me this one time. I looked out the window, streetlights reflecting on the glass like long streaks. I thought about the new name badge in my pocket, about tomorrow morning's shift, about the people who had waited for my answer and gotten it. You have the manual, I said. You have the signature. You're responsible. The line went dead quiet. That night, my family posted on social media, talking about the irresponsibility of the person who used to run operations. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone understood. Comments piled in fast. I read the first few lines, then closed it. I didn't need to argue there. The next morning, I asked for a half-day off. I reprinted the key pages from the procedures, marked the points related to safety, and slid them neatly into a file folder. When I put it into my bag, I knew I wasn't going back to rescue them. I was going back to say one thing that had been ignored for far too long. The inspection happened on a gloomy morning. I arrived at Carter Laundromat right at the time listed on the notice and stood outside for a few minutes before pushing the door open. The familiar detergent smell mixed with hot metal, but the rhythm was different. The old, smooth flow was gone. Two inspectors stood by the counter in dark coats, notebooks already open. Wyatt faced them, hands in his pockets, trying to look calm. The questions started basic. The maximum capacity of dryer number 6, the safe heat threshold for washing natural fibers, the location of the overload auto shutoff sensor. Wyatt answered slowly, eyes flicking toward my parents. A number got said, then corrected. A silence stretched longer than it needed to. I stood near the wall, not yet called by name, hearing every breath in that tight room. The inspector wrote, then changed the question. Procedure when a customer brings in high-value items? Wyatt flipped through the binder, paper rustling. We usually handle it flexibly. The answer hung there. I saw my mother's hand clamp down on the edge of her purse. My father stood straight, but his shoulders had already dropped. Ms. Carter, one inspector turned to me. You were in charge of operations? I nodded. We need you to clarify. The room shifted fast. Wyatt stepped back half a step, as if making space for something unavoidable. I stepped forward and put the file on the table. Without needing to look at the pages, I said each step, sorting heat limits, checking machine logs before and after the shift, sign off. I pointed to the control screen and opened the operating history. The data showed up clearly, date and time, temperature levels, the sensor shut off. Everything clicked into place like the final pieces of a puzzle. One inspector asked about employee training. I answered briefly, directly. No one interrupted. When I stopped, the room went quiet. I could hear the wall clock ticking, the same sound I used to watch every night. My parents looked at me like they were looking at someone who had just stepped out from a hidden corner. Their faces didn't hold anger or blame, just pure shock. Wyatt lowered his head, avoiding everyone's eyes. That so-called vision couldn't hold him up against concrete questions. The inspector closed his notebook and spoke about violations, about consequences if it happened again. His voice stayed even, emotionless. I listened, my hand resting on the table edge. There was no victory, only the truth being put back where it belonged. When they left, my father said my name for the first time that morning. I turned. He opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother stood beside him, her face drained. I didn't add anything. I picked up my file and walked out. Behind me, Carter laundromat fell into a strange kind of silence, like for the first time what had been hidden was finally lit up directly. Even now, a lot of people still tell me that as a child I shouldn't be so cold, that blood is blood. But others say that if you don't draw the line once, they'll keep treating your sacrifice like it's automatic. What about you? If you were in my situation, would you protect the family or protect the truth? Leave a thumbs up emoji if you agree with me, or leave a different opinion below. The meeting happened that night in the familiar living room of the old house. Low warm lights, the soft hum of the air conditioner. My parents sat across from me. Wyatt leaned against the window ledge, twisting his hands together. No one spoke right away. I set my bag down beside the chair and sat up straight. I didn't feel like I had to choose my words anymore. My father started, his voice lower than usual. He talked about reputation, about customers, about problems that still weren't resolved. My mother looked at me, eyes red, and talked about family, about the years I stayed. Wyatt bowed his head and apologized. The apology fell out fast, like a coat thrown onto the wrong person. No one mentioned the inspection that morning. No one mentioned the data on the screen. "We need you to come back," my mother said, "just for a while." I listened without cutting her off. When it was my turn, I put both hands on my knees. "If I come back," I said, "what will I be doing?" The room went silent. My father said I understood the machines best. My mother said I was used to the work. Wyatt said they needed me behind the scenes. "Good," I said. "Then here are my conditions." I spoke slowly, one point at a time, not looking down. A clear role, authority that matches responsibility. No staying behind, no fixing mistakes in the dark. Every operations decision needs my signature, and if there's family pressure, it stops at the door. My father shifted in his seat. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Wyatt looked up, stunned. I continued, short and direct. "And if you can't meet that, I'm not coming back." No one argued right away. The silence stretched long enough for the wall clock to be heard. I looked up at it out of an old habit, then lowered my eyes. That was another habit I needed to drop. My father exhaled. "You're giving your family conditions," he said. "I'm setting boundaries," I replied. My voice stayed normal. Not higher, not lower. My mother reached out like she wanted to take my hand. I stood up before her hand could touch mine. "I'm not continuing to sacrifice, Paul," I said. "Not the old way." Wyatt took one step forward. "Sis," he said, trembling. I looked at him for a beat. "You can do it," I said, "but not by having me carry it for you." I picked up my bag and headed for the door. My father called my name. I turned and paused at the doorway. "I'm not going back to the old shop," I said. "If there's any cooperation, it has to be something new." The door closed behind me. Outside, the night air was cool. I stood still for a beat, then stepped down. No washing machines behind me. Just a space wide enough to know the boundary had been set and the road ahead no longer had a way back. 3 months after that night, I signed an official contract with the laundry chain where I was working. The title was printed clearly on paper, responsibility and authority placed side by side, no more blurred space. I still opened early, still listened to the steady rhythm of machines. But life's tempo was different. When a decision needed to be made, people asked. When a mistake happened, people shared responsibility with me. Work moved cleanly without me having to stand behind it and patch it up. My old family didn't disappear overnight. They called less, spoke slower. There were dinners without me, conversations that stopped halfway. That was the cost. Losing a familiar role, keeping myself. No complete victory, just a new kind of calm, fragile but real. What I carried from all of it wasn't a sharp comeback or a need to win, just one simple understanding. Fairness doesn't come from silence. It comes from saying clearly where you stand, what you do, and being willing to walk away when those things are treated lightly. Boundaries don't destroy a family. Having no boundaries is what twists everything out of shape. The story you just heard is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and human experience, with the support of AI and edited by humans to offer reflection and educational value. It does not target any specific person or family, and it does not encourage copying every action in the story. Every situation is different, and every choice needs to be weighed carefully. If there's one thing I wanted to keep for myself, it's self-respect. Not loud self-respect, but the kind that listens to the small signals inside when you're carrying things for others, when you're being valued lower than the effort you're putting in. If you're in a similar situation, you can start small. Write down responsibilities, make expectations clear, find a place where you're heard before making a big decision. Before we end, I want to ask you the familiar question. Where are you listening to this story right now? In the car on your way home, in the kitchen while cleaning up, or alone after a long day? If this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Press like if you found it useful, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and share it if you think someone needs to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end. The fact that you listened is already a kind of respect for yourself and for the stories that need to be told.